The world's most expensive fish sale happened in a Tokyo warehouse at 5 in the morning when a single bluefin tuna sold for over $3 million. Not the whole boat's catch, not a season's worth of fishing, one fish. And somewhere behind that number is an entire hidden industry that most people never think about. An industry where a single vessel can cost more than a mansion, where a captain's instincts are worth more than any sonar system, and where a company can go from broke to wildly profitable based on nothing more than the migration pattern of a species that has existed for over 4 million years. This is the economics of owning a tuna company, and by the end, you'll understand why some of the richest seafood empires on Earth were built on something as simple and as brutal as chasing fish across an ocean. Most people picture tuna as a can on a supermarket shelf, something cheap, something forgettable. But that image only tells half the story. Tuna is actually two industries wearing one name. On one side, there's the canned tuna business, a low-margin, high-volume game played by massive companies pumping out billions of cans a year. On the other side, there's the fresh and sashimi-grade tuna trade, a world of razor-thin supply, insane demand, and prices that can make a fisherman's entire year in a single trip. Owning a tuna company means choosing which version of this business you're actually in, because the startup costs, the risks, and the profits look completely different depending on which side of that line you're standing on. Let's start with the money it takes just to get in the water. A single commercial fishing vessel capable of catching tuna at scale, whether that's a purse seiner chasing skipjack or a longliner targeting yellowfin and bigeye, can cost anywhere from $500,000 for an older, smaller boat to over $30 million for a modern purse seiner with helicopter support and refrigerated hold systems. Then there's the fishing license itself, which in some countries is more valuable than the boat. Access rights to fish in certain tuna-rich waters, especially in the Pacific, are auctioned or licensed by island nations, and those permits alone can run into the millions annually. Add fuel, which for a single long fishing trip can hit six figures, add crew wages, add satellite tracking equipment to find schools of fish in an ocean that covers over 60% of the Earth's surface, and suddenly the entry price for a serious tuna operation starts looking less like a fishing business and more like owning an airline. But here's the twist most people don't expect. The real money in tuna isn't caught in the boat. It's made in the middle. The companies that dominate this industry aren't necessarily the ones with the most vessels. They're the ones controlling the supply chain between the ocean and the plate. A tuna company can operate its own fleet, buy fish from independent fishermen, or do both, acting as a processor and distributor rather than just a catcher. This is where the business model actually starts to make sense financially, because processing, canning, freezing, and distributing tuna is where consistent, scalable revenue lives, while fishing itself remains wildly unpredictable. That unpredictability is the first hidden cost nobody talks about enough. Tuna don't sit still, and they don't follow a schedule. A boat can spend 2 weeks at sea, burn through tens of thousands of dollars in fuel, and come back with a hold that's half empty because the fish simply weren't where the sonar said they'd be. Compare that to a factory that makes shoes, where the raw material shows up on a predictable delivery schedule. In tuna, the raw material is a wild animal that migrates thousands of miles, reacts to ocean temperature shifts, and can vanish from traditional fishing grounds overnight due to something as small as a change in current. This is why experienced captains are paid almost like star athletes in this world, sometimes earning bonuses tied directly to catch size, because their knowledge of migration patterns can be the difference between a profitable trip and a financial disaster. Now let's talk about where the actual revenue comes from, because it's more layered than just selling fish. The first stream is the raw catch itself, sold either to processors, exporters, or directly to auction markets. The second is processing and canning, where a tuna company adds value by turning raw fish into shelf-stable products, and margins here, while thin per unit, scale up dramatically with volume. The third and most fascinating stream is the premium sashimi and export market, particularly the trade routes feeding into Japan, where bluefin tuna prices operate almost like a stock market. Grading a tuna for sashimi quality involves inspecting the fat content, the color, the texture, sometimes even cutting a small sample from the tail to judge the marbling before the whole fish is sold. A poorly graded fish might sell for a few dollars a pound. A perfectly marbled bluefin destined for Tokyo's fish markets can sell for prices that make a single fish worth more than a car. This is where the psychology of the business becomes impossible to ignore. Tuna, especially bluefin, has become a status symbol in certain markets, similar to rare wine or luxury watches. The record-breaking auction sales you sometimes hear about aren't purely about supply and demand economics. They're partly marketing. A restaurant that buys the season's most expensive tuna generates headlines, and those headlines generate reservations. So, in a strange way, part of the tuna industry runs on the same psychological fuel as the luxury goods industry, where price itself becomes a signal of status rather than just a reflection of cost. But underneath the glamorous sashimi auctions is a much harsher operational reality. Running a tuna company means managing spoilage risk every single day. Tuna needs to be processed and frozen or delivered fresh within a narrow window, or its value collapses almost instantly. This is why companies invest heavily in ultra-low temperature freezing technology, capable of preserving tuna at nearly -60 degrees Celsius to lock in the quality for the export market. Miss that freezing window, or lose power on a vessel refrigeration system for even a few hours, and a boat's entire multi-million-dollar catch can drop in value overnight. This single operational detail explains why some tuna companies spend more on refrigeration and logistics infrastructure than they do on the boats themselves. Then there's the regulatory side of the business, which has become one of the biggest risks in the entire industry. Bluefin tuna populations were pushed towards serious overfishing by the early 2000s, leading to strict international quotas on how much can legally be caught each year. These quotas are now enforced through organizations that monitor fishing zones across the Atlantic, Pacific, and Mediterranean. For a tuna company, this means growth isn't simply about catching more fish. It's about securing a bigger slice of a tightly controlled, government-regulated allowance. Companies that fail to comply, whether through illegal fishing or exceeding quotas, don't just face fines. They can lose their license to operate entirely, which in an industry this specialized is close to a death sentence for the business. Real-world examples make this risk and reward dynamic easy to understand. Some of the largest seafood companies in the world built their empire not by owning boats at all, but by controlling processing plants and distribution networks that independent fishermen depend on to sell their catch. Meanwhile, smaller family-run tuna operations in coastal fishing towns have collapsed almost overnight after a single bad season. A boat malfunction, or a sudden quota cut left them unable to cover their fixed costs. The difference between survival and collapse in this industry often comes down to diversification. Companies that only rely on the catch, and nothing else, are essentially betting their entire business on the ocean cooperating year after year. This leads directly into the biggest mistake new entrants make when trying to break into tuna. They treat it like a straightforward fishing business: buy a boat, hire a crew, and expect the fish and the profits to follow. What they don't account for is how much of this industry lives in logistics, grading expertise, and market relationships. Knowing how to catch a tuna is only the beginning. Knowing how to grade it, freeze it properly, and sell it into the right market at the right time is where the real skill and the real money actually lives. Countless new tuna operations have folded not because they couldn't catch fish, but because they couldn't sell what they caught for anywhere close to its potential value. So what does profit potential actually look like in this business? For companies operating purely in the canned and processed tuna market, margins are thin, often in the single digits per unit, but the volume can be enormous, with some of the largest global tuna processors moving well over $1 billion in annual revenue. For companies operating in the premium fresh and export market, the margins per fish can be extraordinary, but the volume is small, unpredictable, and completely dependent on catch success and market timing. The companies that thrive long-term tend to blend both worlds, using stable canned and processed revenue to survive the lean seasons, while chasing premium export sales during the years when the ocean and the migration patterns cooperate. When you step back and look at the whole picture, owning a tuna company is really a bet on three things happening at once: controlling a wild and unpredictable resource, managing an incredibly narrow window between catch and spoilage, and navigating a regulatory system built to prevent the very overfishing that made this industry so valuable in the first place. It's part fishing, part logistics empire, part luxury goods marketing, all balanced on top of an ocean that doesn't care about quarterly earnings. And maybe that's the real lesson hiding inside this industry. The most valuable resources in the world aren't always the rarest ones sitting still waiting to be mined or manufactured. Sometimes the most valuable resource on Earth is the one that's already swimming away from you, and the real fortune belongs to whoever can catch it, keep it, and sell it before it's gone.